The Gulf Coast Growth Show is sponsored by Chevron Pasadena Refinery and is an extension of the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region, where our mission is to market and grow a vibrant regional economy. All right, guys, and hey, welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host, Jason Lee, and with my co-host, Zeke Smith. And we are joined by Stephen Hillier, the CEO of Apache Industrials, right out here and right down the street from us.
That's right.
So a local company, and then also the place where my co-host gets the opportunity to do work every day. So,
Yes, I do.
So very huge pleasure having you join us today, guys. We've got a phenomenal outline for you. I think Stephen has an amazing journey that we're going to get to hear about, and I can't wait to hear that. But also, we're going to talk about leadership. You don't want to hear from anybody better than leadership than somebody who's had a story like yours, from growing up in the trenches to being a CEO of a huge organization. And then we're going to talk a lot about communication and how that helps impact leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we get ready to wrap up, the last thing, and I think it's near and dear to your heart,
sure,
we're going to talk about the importance of mental health, especially in the workplace and the work environment. So such great topics today. And with that being said, Stephen, I'm going to let you kick it off. For those that don't know you, I think you have a great story. Tell us where it all began and then what got you here today.
Sounds good. First off, thank you for having me on the show this morning. I really do appreciate it. I always like to tell this story, and if I get a little too long, just pull me back a little bit. But I get asked all the time how I actually started in the business, and how I actually started in the business was a little bit different. I had planned to go become a pediatrician, and my girlfriend, now my wife of 33 years, ended up getting pregnant at 19 years old, and I had to make a quick shift into an area that's going to actually support the family. So I joined the trades. I became a first-year ironworker apprentice. Up in Canada is where I am originally. I'll throw in a couple of A's a little bit later for you.
Yeah.
But I think the important part is that when I started in my career, I actually started in the trenches, and you touched on that earlier. Started as a first-year apprentice, and I worked my way through the organization into a journey person. I was actually in a leadership role very early in my career. I became a foreperson at age of 22. And my first crew, I was leading people 45 and above, about a 6-person crew, which was unique for a young individual coming in to run a trades organization or a team at 22 years old, not a journey person at that time. I built my career up. I took every opportunity I could get my hands on to advance my career. So I moved into safety. I moved into more senior roles. I got into specialty delivery of work, got into turnarounds, major projects, and started to build. I did spend quite a bit of time on the safety side of the world. Spent about 8 years doing that. I actually went back to school, night school. It's really unique when you actually train and do your homework alongside your kids that are in elementary school and you're doing your school for university. So I worked that in conjunction with the amount of work I was doing to improve me as an individual, as a leader, as a person, as a family man. Moved into safety. I got transferred. I was in Fort McMurray, Alberta. I got transferred down to Calgary in corporate office to become the second in command for the National Safety Group. And company sold. And the company sold to a company called Jacobs. And I spent quite a number of years with Jacobs, who gave me opportunities to do a lot of different things. I moved into sales, inside sales, which I don't wish upon anybody. I've got a lot of respect for people that do that amount of detailed work. Moved into outside sales, and then I was asked to take on an operational role, move back into operations. So from that point, I moved into running the Canadian operations on maintenance and operations. Built that business from a $365 million, give or take, business to a $1.7 billion business in 5 years, with a team that was just spectacular. And I'll touch on that when we touch on leadership a little bit. Then I was asked to come down to the U.S., transferred down to the U.S., and asked to come back out of operations, move back into sales. I will tell you, as a leader, when you're leading a business that you've grown and you've stepped back down and what you consider a demotion in your career, it's an ego check. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a demotion in the sense that you're moving from an operational P&L to a specific role. It was to help the company improve the overall business.
Right.
So I moved back into sales. Had to work with a client down here to rebuild a couple of client organizations and sales opportunities. And then I was tapped on the shoulder again to take over operations. And I ended up taking over North American operations for Jacobs at the time, which was a maintenance, construction, turnaround business. Moved from there, got into a more global role, ended up doing that role for the company. Spent a lot of time in the Middle East, working back and forth around all opportunities. Wow. Then worked on a major acquisition with Jacobs of the CH2 organization. I worked through the due diligence, the transition. And then actually Jacobs decided at the time that they were going to change courses and move in a different direction, and sold the businesses that we were involved with, which was the energy, chemicals, and resources business, to Worley. And then I ended up working with Worley for a couple of years. During that time, with a lot of support from the CEO of Worley, I ended up going back to do my master's here at Rice and finished my master's. Took on 2 transitional positions with them, led the global, what they call integrated services, then moved in to lead the Americas business on EPC and consultancy, and then made the decision to leave the organization and join Apache in 2021.
Wow. That's an impressive resume. Yeah, and I think
You moved around a little bit.
yeah, but with just the story and the component around leadership of stepping in where needed, you know, not being too proud to be able to say no, that's where you need me. I'm
Right.
put me in the game, coach. It really speaks to you, and then now having the opportunity to be essentially in an organization at the top of the food chain,
Right.
and then be able to speak that into others, I think is I mean, who it would be hard not to want to listen, right? We call it leader led, where I grew up, right? A guy could step out in front and he's not afraid to say, "I've done that job."
Right.
You've done that job,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
so talk to us about that. I think we'd be remiss not to get some insight as to your philosophy on leadership.
Yeah. Look, I look at 3 really key subjects when I look at leadership. First off is accountability. And I think there's a lot of people that ask for accountability in their lives. And once you give them accountability, there's a nervousness about taking on the responsibility of what that actually means. Every position I stepped into, I was successful because of the people around me. And I think when you think about accountability and you can drive, and I've made a lot of mistakes, I make mistakes every day. I think having the ability to allow your teams to go out and do the things they need to do to grow the business, but learn, right? We all know what happens if you make the same mistake over and over and over again. And I think what's important is that ability to learn, to have the accountability inside the business, and then really drive that focus. So that ties really well into team building. As I said, I wouldn't have been where I'm at today if that first leadership role I received, all the people on that crew could have walked away from me.
Mm-hmm.
They could have said, he's young, he's arrogant, he's not qualified to do the role. Not one of them did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what that gave me the ability to do was listen. Sometimes I need to listen a little harder. Let's be clear. And
Right.
I had a really good coaching section with a journeyman at the time. His name was Alex Starkey, and I'll remember him till the day I die. Probably one of the best individuals I've ever worked with. German immigrant, was an iron worker, rebar specialist. He got into structural. He did all these types of things. And he's a gentleman that probably taught me more about leadership early on in my career than anybody has ever taught me. And the respect, the approach, the knowledge he imparted about just doing and not trying to be something you're not was impressive. And I think when I think about how we build teams, which is extremely important for me from a leadership point of view, is I'm not looking for everybody that's like-minded. In fact, I'm looking for people that are not like-minded. And if I put everybody that was the same as me inside of a team, we wouldn't be successful. Right. So diversity, differentiation, educational differentiation, just people's styles and the difference of them really drives that team concept. And one of the reasons I joined Apache was when I was speaking with the owners, they talked about what we needed to do from team development and where we needed to pivot the organization. And that was something that I honed in on very, very quickly, having the ability to put a team together that continues to thrive. Ironically, we've only made 2 senior position changes in the organization. We brought in a new head of human resources, and we brought in a new chief commercial officer. Outside of that, the team has stepped up in a lot of the areas, and we've promoted from within, which also develops that concept of why you need a team, why you need to have the people that are there, the historical knowledge, right? The last thing is communication. And I think when I look at leadership, when I look at good leaders I've had and poor leaders that I've worked with in the past, which I've learned probably more from than the good leaders, is that they have very unique communication styles. And we hear a lot about culture, and we hear a lot about what you need to do to run an operation, to run a business, to run a change in philosophy, to pivot when the business is changing. And I think when we look at the ability to drive accountability, the ability to put a team together, we've got to be able to communicate. And what's ironic about communication, it's not always the good communication, right? I mean, you've got to have tough conversations, and you've got to be respectful of the situation you're in. But sometimes you need to sit down and have that really, really hard conversation to improve.
Right.
And I think that's what drives it. And to me, that all rolls up into one very important thing for us, and that's the culture of the organization. And you'll hear a lot of conversations about culture trumps strategy every single time, right? You can't win from a strategic point of view if you don't have the right culture. And I think what the right culture is what's the mix of leadership, but what really drives the ownership of the organization.
Fantastic. And you touched up on communication briefly. You mentioned as one of the pillars in
Right.
regards to leadership. Talk to us really about how communication plays a role in driving the culture, driving the execution. What's the significance of that particular, I guess, pillar behavior, right?
Right.
So,
Look, I think it's foundational. I touched on that. I think if you're not communicating with the folks inside your business, your teams, the way you want to take your business, the way you're dealing with your owners, your board, um, there's no way for them to understand where we're going, right? So when I say it's as simplistic as getting up, just prior to Zeke joining us, we had our first town hall. From what I understand, in the history of the company,
Mm.
about 2.5 months after I joined. And we started out small. We started out with the corporate office, about 120, 125 people. Then we expanded it out to put it on Zoom, our teams, to get all the local offices. And we've been building from that point forward. And what I committed to the organization is that transparency and communication has got to be paramount on how we do business.
Mhm.
So if you've got the ability to have a conversation, have the conversation with the facts, have the conversation and cut the rumor mill, cut the
Water cooler talk.
the water cooler talk, the non-factual conversations, right? I know, because I don't think that leads to successful execution of anything that we do in organizations. So build that foundational and then lead by example. If we're saying we're going to talk and it'll be open and transparent, then we're going to be open and transparent. So we've carried those conversations all the way through. We've had some tough conversations inside the business. I think when you transition an organization that's been around since 1996 and you're taking it in a different direction, it's tough when people are used to being managed a certain way, being used to being communicated a certain way, or not communicated in a certain way. It really drives that openness. I would tell you the second thing is when I talk about accountability and communication, we actually talk accountability. So if there's problems, we address them. We make them known to the folks that need to be aware of them. And then it's just that sit down like we're doing today, get across the table, have conversations one on one, have them in groups. Like I say, some conversations are there. I'm not a leader that is by the book. Like
Right.
I'm by the book, but I'm not by the book. I'm not follow point A to get to B to get to C to get to D. Sometimes you're in A, and all of a sudden the meeting goes in a different direction. You've got to pivot, and you've got to come in and hit point D,
Right.
and then you've got to work yourself back into the organization and say, okay, let's take it from there.
Right.
So I think the best quote I've ever had, the comment ever made to me was after the last town hall. We had a gentleman that came up to me and said, "You make me extremely uncomfortable with the transparency and the open communication that you have." I said, "Perfect, that's success."
Yeah.
That's absolute
I love
success.
it.
Right?
Yeah.
And look, I don't know all the stories that Steven is going to share with us today. Of course, I heard some of them, but I'll tell you, I can back him on that small, incremental change of, hey, just something as simple. It sounds simple, of having a town hall, which is not a revolutionary, progressive thing to do. It's just, hey, let's start talking. And look, he did in that town hall the second one that I was attended. Other than refusing to share his Montreal smoked meat recipe and his famous poutine recipe, he will not share those things. He did say out loud on this, national webinar, town hall, there's no question I won't answer. Ask it all, right? Ask it all. I had an apprentice one time ask him what his salary was. He was like, "So how much you make?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, let's pivot there." And Steven just goes, "Not enough."
Definitely not enough.
So I was like, this is transparency. There you go. So
Awesome.
anyway, so back of the man up there.
Great area great spot right there for us to pivot. So
Yeah.
Yep.
So Steven mentioned earlier, you mentioned why you came to Apache. And so I've said this to you and to Samantha, my boss, some of the reasons why I came to Apache, which is relatively recent. And one of them was my conversation with him, which was like this. He happens to have a nice couch in his office, and he didn't sit behind his desk, and I didn't sit at his desk. He's like, have a seat on the couch, and we talked barbecue for 20 minutes before we got to any kind of technical questions. So,
awesome.
and a factor. Biggest factor is his drive for people focus, right? So focusing on their total health, right? So health and safety being not just physical, but emotional, mental, financial wellness of our employees, and that is a driver for me. And
Right.
it was a really easy sync point for me to say, okay, this is the type of company and this is the type of leader that I want to go work for. So I want to bring that back to you to say what brought you to that point. People that follow Apache on LinkedIn see that we're really honed in on our employees and the industry, frankly.
Right.
Mental health as a topic, starting with awareness and starting to destigmatize and all that stuff. So tell us, kind of give us the background of where that comes from for you, why it's such an important part of your personal and professional mission at Apache as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Zeke. Look, I think if it's okay, I've got to take you back quite a few years on where this all started. I was 5 years old when my dad took a 46-foot fall off a building. My dad was an iron worker and ended up in ICU. And my mom, plus my 4 sisters, pretty much didn't know what was going to happen. Was he going to survive? Was he going to die? What was going to happen? Sole breadwinner at that time for the family. If it wasn't for the help of the church, the local friends, the community, I use this expression, probably wouldn't be where we're at today. My dad survived, got pinned together, got put back together, and continued a long career. I actually retired him. He was in the business I was running at the time, and he retired under my watch, which is it's quite a cool story.
Yeah.
But I think when you
For
think
the next episode, I guess.
We're gonna have to have a whole other episode with you, man. Jeez.
I think what's important is that I've seen the effects of what happens when people get hurt and the mental anguish that causes the families. My mom is a rock. I mean, she is spectacular, and I think about every conversation that we've had over the years. She did things to help eliminate stress of kids before I think it ever became fashionable, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Throughout my entire career, I've run into situations where people are dealing with things, and I think all of us deal with things on a daily basis. And I think to have there used to be an expression in our business where you leave the brain at the gate and we'll do the thinking for you. And I think that caused a really huge hole in the way that we communicate as individuals, as leaders, and all of us are leaders in one form or another, in the way that we communicate what mental health is, what mental resiliency is. And I think that's a gap that we've actually had inside the business probably for the last 25 years. It's starting to come more relevant and become more relevant today because people are not afraid to have those conversations, but there's still stigmas associated with it, right? If you ask a lot of my leadership right now, if there's family issue on a Friday or they want to go and spend the day looking at their kids sing in a choir, go do it, right? I mean, we work 24/7. That's the roles we're in today. But there's times that you need to step aside and say, okay, go have a work-life balance. Go deal with your family. Go be with your loved ones. And I think what's important is that mental resiliency pays off tenfold, right? That ability to be flexible in the way we do our work and the way we treat ourselves as human beings is extremely important. This year started out terrible for our family. My oldest son, Alex, ended up losing his girlfriend at 33 years old with a massive coronary.
Oh my gosh.
He found her on the floor, performed CPR until paramedics got there. And I will tell you, we're dealing with the repercussions of that incident as a family, as a group, as his friend group. And I've shared that widely with the team and with our organization because I think it's important that leaders admit they're human. Okay. I think that's extremely important. But what I also think is important is that if you've got experiences that can help somebody else, I think it's important to get it out on the table. My situation is different from others. We've had a couple of situations inside the company where we've had to step in and help organizations. Passing of a young gentleman with one of our coworkers, his grandson this year. Things like that are important for us. And that's not always that extreme. Sometimes it's just to have a conversation. So we actually partnered with a company called Headversity to talk about resiliency, to talk about mental health and making it a non-stigma subject inside of our business.
Wow. What's it called again?
Headversity.
Headversity.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Headversity.
Perfect.
Yeah, we've had some of the guys, the hardest of hardened construction guys have come and said, we had a safety leader come and said, I started to meditate because of this thing.
Yeah.
Just some really cool, and it's, we've had some folks take it to their family, their sons, some of our senior leaders that you just don't see that side of them at work,
right?
For whatever reason, right or wrong. As said, just because we started to talk about it, and we're not just saying, hey, go home and deal with your personal things, we're bringing it to them and saying, hey, this is a community, an Apache community, that we're going to hand you some things and help train you on how to deal with. We train you how to deal with your work. We're not training you how to deal with Stephen and his son's issues. Like,
Right.
he's not obviously
I-
trained to deal with that, right? So,
Unbelievable.
yeah, it's been great.
Yeah,
So-
I think one of the things that I'm hearing here is that we had you've heard I hear the term like snowflake thrown
Right.
around all the time, and it's like we know because guys who grew up in the industrial space, even your our generation, even our generation, really like it was considered just don't talk about that stuff, put your head down, go to work. I mean, for years that's been what was taught. And I think you can also take the pendulum and shift it too far, right? Where all you're doing is everybody's running around,
no
unicorns and rainbows, no accountability.
Yeah, sure.
So, but the best leaders I ever worked for, the best organizations I ever worked for, inside of that I was only with a few organizations, but I worked with leaders inside, so that we were a mini organization.
Right.
That leader knew how to make you go, okay, no, you're going to do your job, you're going to get everything done. But when something happens, man, like we're human.
That's
Like, right, so we have to identify that we're human. We have to identify that we got to be able to deal with those things. And then, so having a guy at the absolute top of the organization who believes in that, and I know his passion for it,
Right.
and there at the organization, speaks to the culture, and honestly, it's the kind of stuff that when a person in a competitive environment where people are thinking about, am I going to go over here with the benefits package here, the over here, everyone's fighting for that talent, and so when someone says, I don't know, man. Like the recruiter email hits the inbox, and they just don't open it. It just goes straight to the trash because they say, "I'm here because these guys." There's no way I'm ever leaving. When my CEO said, "No, man, like you need to go home and handle that. I'm out. Like forget about it. Never going anywhere."
When your money where your mouth is with the culture piece, it's not just a word on a wall, right? So I know we're getting to the end.
Yeah,
just wanted to give you a shot to talk about some of the mission and things moving forward from your 18 months, right? Steven's famous about having a saying for the year. It's really, I like it because I'm a simpleton like that. I like that focus. It's a good kind of a rally cry. So tell us about that 21, 22, and 23.
Yeah, 21 was a whirlwind. Look, 21 was 3 months to the end of the year. I came into the business. It was go and listen, meet people, talk with people, see what we're doing, how we're doing things. 22 was a foundational year for us, and we approached it from that perspective, right? Transitional and transformation, and foundational for the way we were going to set the strategy for the business moving forward. I think when we look at 23, it's our team, our growth, right? So one team, our growth is the motto for this year, and the reason behind that is when we look at where we need to go, and look. We're in a business that is very competitive, easy entry into the business for a lot of the types of work we do. We've established on the core aspects of what we do in the business, not diversifying into areas that just doesn't make sense today. We have expectations. We've got owners that are looking for return on investment. But I think if we're working as the one team and really growing into the areas that we need to grow, that's what's going to continue to drive us. I think the other thing that we looked at was when we're talking about execution, we have people that are inside the business that are giving advice, right? As I said, we did not change out a lot of folks. We promoted young leaders inside the business. We're doing things that are looking at longevity of the organization. Sometimes it's good, right? And I think change scares everybody, and there's a fear every time there's a bit of change. Am I going to live up to my expectations? Am I going to drive that forward? So that's what this year's motto is about, is getting people aligned around the expectations of the organization, what we need to do, how do we need to pivot, how do we need to continue to become better. We have to be an execution excellence organization, but we have to be a business that diversifies and gives a differentiation in the way that we execute work, which means we're not going to do it the old school way for the rest of our lives.
Right.
We're going to drive just digitization into the business. We're going to put innovation inside the business, but it's got to be done on a foundational basis.
Unbelievable. Fantastic. Well, and then so we're getting ready to wrap up the show. As we, close out, we always like to give our guests, any last thing, that you want to absolutely share with their audience, or any additional thoughts before we get out.
Look, I think one of the areas that we focused on in the last 18 months was really getting out into the community. And as Apache, we do a lot within the communities. Deer Park, you go into Houston, you go into different areas that we're working around in Canada and the U.S. And I think a couple of things that I'd really like to hone in on is that support of those associations that we're working with.
Okay.
So SB 250, Spina Bifida 250, we work with a nonprofit called Susanna Smiles. We're the keynote sponsor for them on a SB 250 is a ride from McCallum to San Antonio. It's done in June. And it's there to raise awareness of people dealing with spina bifida and the ramifications of mobility and getting folks and the families that are working with them. The second one is the CEO Foundation, Jackie Pham. Jackie Pham lost her 3 children and her mom to a massive house fire here a couple of years ago in the freeze up of Texas. And she is just an incredible individual. And she started a foundation called the CEO Foundation, which is named after her children. And that is to look at leadership, growth, getting kids involved in a lot of different things for them to move forward. And I think as Apache, reasons we've jumped in on these associations, Junior Achievement's another one. The reason we've jumped in working with these nonprofits is to get a understanding that Apache is in these communities and we're working with these communities. We put 7,000 people to work every day.
Wow.
Okay. We don't want to stop putting 7,000 people to work. And I put it out there as you throw the pebble in the water and you watch the ripples. And if each one of those 7,000 have 4 people in their immediate families, and then they have 4 more in their immediate families, we're affecting a lot of folks inside the business and inside the industry. And that's what's driving us as an organization to be better.
Fantastic. So unbelievable. And so it's about community. It's about your people. So I think we shared so much about on this organization or on this episode around what your organization is doing and how you're doing it. So we're thankful to have you for that.
Appreciate it.
And thankful that my partner in crime here gets to be a part of it. So it's exciting. So and for our audience, again, if you want to just stay connected, you can always plug in, connect with Zeke and myself on LinkedIn. Stephen, if anybody ever wanted to reach out or anything from you, what's the best way to
LinkedIn? I utilize LinkedIn
active,
a lot. I'm quite active
awesome.
on LinkedIn.
He likes the show. I see.
Yeah, and then just grab me through that.
Right,
and then
perfect.
Zeke knows how to get a hold of me every other time. But,
there you go.
Yeah, it works well.
Awesome, fantastic. And then and you can always, like we always encourage our audience, please pay this show forward. Somebody needs to hear this. I know specifically when it comes to leadership, I'm already thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about 5 or 6 of my clients who I'm going to pass this episode along and be like, man, this is a great episode on leadership. So you need to pay it forward and put it out there to somebody who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed already, please go to the Gulf Coast or the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region website under media, go to the Gulf Coast Growth Show, and you can subscribe to any of our shows from there and follow us on your favorite channel. So we look forward to seeing you guys next week. As always, thank you for tuning in. And again, we'll see you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to go to the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region website and subscribe to our channels. And let's pay it forward by sharing the good news of what's happening in our region by passing this episode to somebody you know.